The fingerprints matched. The DNA matched. Even the scar on his left hand from when I cut myself opening evidence bags last year. It matched perfectly. Every test we ran confirmed it. The man I arrested was me. But I was standing right there, running the tests. So the question isn't who committed the crime. It's which one of us is real. My name is Detective Marcus Sullivan, and I've been with the Cedar Falls Police Department for 23 years. Cedar Falls is one of those small Midwestern towns where the biggest crime is usually teenagers spray painting the water tower or someone's dad getting too friendly with a bottle of whiskey on a Saturday night. Population 8,400, give or take whoever's left for college and hasn't come back yet. I've worked everything from petty theft to the occasional domestic dispute, and in all my years on the force, I thought I'd seen it all. Hell, I was 6 months away from retirement, already planning fishing trips and maybe finally fixing up that old Camaro in my garage. Life was predictable, routine, safe. That all changed on October 15th, 2023, at exactly 11:47 p.m. It was a Tuesday, which should tell you everything about how ordinary this night was supposed to be. I was on the late shift, partnered with Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp young cop who'd transferred in from Chicago 2 years ago. Sarah was good people, methodical, thorough, and most importantly, she made decent coffee, which was crucial for the graveyard shift. We were parked outside Mel's 24-hour diner, working our way through Sarah's surprisingly good Colombian blend and updating paperwork on a vandalism case from the weekend. The radio had been quiet all night, just the usual check-ins and a noise complaint that resolved itself before we could respond. "You know what I love about this town?" Sarah said, stretching in the passenger seat. "The fact that our biggest crisis this week was Mrs. Patterson's cat getting stuck in the Johnson's chimney." I chuckled, remembering the 3-hour rescue operation that had involved half the fire department and eventually required dismantling part of the chimney. "Don't jinx it, Chen. The moment you say it's quiet." The radio crackled to life, interrupting my warning. "All units, we have a possible 10-14 in progress at 1247 Maple Street. Resident reports seeing an individual attempting to gain entry through a rear window. Units 7 and 12, please respond." Sarah and I exchanged looks. Unit 7 was us. "So much for your peaceful Tuesday," she said, already reaching for her seatbelt. 1247. Maple Street was in the Riverside district, one of the older neighborhoods where the houses sat on large lots with mature oak trees that created deep shadows even under the streetlights. These were the homes of Cedar Falls' original families, solid, middle-class folks who'd lived here for generations. As we pulled up to the address, I could see it was the Henderson place. Eleanor Henderson was a widow in her 70s who'd taught 3rd grade at Cedar Falls Elementary for 42 years before retiring. Her husband had died 5 years ago, and since then she'd become one of those neighborhood watch types who knew every car, every routine, every deviation from normal. The house was a 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, surrounded by a well-maintained garden that Eleanor took pride in. A single porch light illuminated the front entrance, but the back of the house where the alleged break-in was occurring was shrouded in darkness. We parked across the street and killed the engine. Standard procedure for a possible burglary in progress. Observe first, then approach with caution. "I'll take the front," I told Sarah. "You circle around back, but stay in radio contact. If there is someone back there, we don't want them slipping out while we're coordinating." "Copy that," Sarah responded, checking her weapon and radio. "Be careful, Marcus. Something feels off about this." I knew what she meant. In a town like Cedar Falls, break-ins were rare, and when they did happen, they were usually crimes of opportunity. Teenagers looking for quick cash or prescription drugs. Professional burglars didn't waste time on small-town houses where the most valuable items were usually grandma's china and maybe a few pieces of jewelry. I approached the front of the house, keeping to the shadows and maintaining visual contact with the street. The neighborhood was dead quiet. No dogs barking, no lights coming on in adjacent houses, nothing to indicate anyone else was aware of what was supposedly happening. That's when I heard Sarah's voice through my earpiece, tight with tension. "Marcus, I've got eyes on the suspect. Male, approximately 6 feet tall, dark clothing. He's working on the kitchen window with some kind of tool." "Copy. Can you get a better visual on his face?" "Negative. He's got his back to me. But Marcus, this guy knows what he's doing. Professional movements, seems to know the layout. This isn't some random junkie." I moved closer to the house, using the large oak tree in the front yard for cover. From my position, I could see around to the side yard, where Sarah would be positioned. "I'm moving to flank from the north side," I whispered into my radio. "When I give the signal, we approach simultaneously. Standard containment." "Roger that." I crept along the side of the house, my weapon drawn but pointed down. 23 years of training kicked in. Controlled breathing, heightened awareness, every sense tuned to detect the slightest threat. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and that particular smell of approaching winter. As I rounded the corner toward the back of the house, I caught my first glimpse of the suspect, and my blood turned to ice. Even in the dim light filtering through the kitchen window, even with his back turned to me, I knew that silhouette. The way he held his shoulders, the slight favor of his left leg where I'd torn my ACL chasing a suspect 3 years ago, the exact way he was holding what I now recognized as a standard police-issue lockpick set. I was looking at myself. "Sarah," I whispered into my radio, my voice barely controlled. "I need you to get a clear visual on the suspect's face. Use your flashlight if you have to." "Marcus, that'll blow our cover." "Do it, now." I watched as Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the figure at the window. He turned toward the light, and I found myself looking into my own face. Not someone who resembled me. Not a twin I didn't know about. It was me. Same scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood accident. Same slightly crooked nose from breaking it during a high school football game. Same 5 o'clock shadow pattern that Sarah always joked made me look like a detective from a 1970s cop show. The other me, because I don't know what else to call him, squinted in the flashlight beam and raised one hand to shield his eyes. In that moment, I saw the distinctive white scar across his palm, the one I'd gotten last year when I'd carelessly opened an evidence bag containing a broken glass bottle. "Jesus Christ!" Sarah's voice came through the radio, shaky and disbelieving. "Marcus, that's you." Protocol demanded I identify myself as police and order the suspect to surrender. Training said to establish control of the situation. 23 years of experience told me to call for backup. But what do you do when the suspect is you? "Police, show me your hands," I shouted, stepping out from cover with my weapon trained on myself. The other Marcus looked directly at me, and for a moment our eyes met. There was no surprise in his expression, no shock at seeing his mirror image pointing a gun at him. Instead, there was something I recognized all too well, the resigned acceptance of someone who'd been caught red-handed and knew there was no point in running. He raised both hands slowly, the lockpick set dropping to the ground with a metallic clink that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. "Detective Marcus Sullivan, Cedar Falls PD," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. It was my voice, exact to every inflection and tone. "Badge number 4427. That was my badge number. "Get on the ground, now!" I ordered, my training overriding the impossibility of what I was witnessing. The other Marcus complied, dropping to his knees and then lying face down on the grass with his hands behind his head. Standard arrest position that we'd both practiced countless times at the academy and in refresher training. Sarah approached from the other side, her weapon also drawn, her face pale with confusion and something approaching panic. "Marcus," she said, looking back and forth between me and the man on the ground. "What the hell is going on here? I don't know, I admitted, moving closer to cuff the suspect. But we're going to find out. The arrest itself was surreal. As I knelt down to place handcuffs on the other Marcus, I was struck by details that should have been impossible for someone else to replicate. The way his hair fell across his forehead was exactly like mine. When I pulled his hands behind his back, I felt the same slight resistance in his left shoulder that I had from an old injury. Even his breathing pattern was identical to mine. "You have the right to remain silent," I began, reciting the Miranda rights I'd given thousands of times before. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As I spoke, the other Marcus turned his head slightly so he could look at me. "You have the right to an attorney," he said along with me, word for word, our voices creating an eerie harmony. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Sarah took a step back. "This isn't possible," she whispered. I finished the arrest and helped the other Marcus to his feet. Standing face to face with him was like looking into a perfect mirror, except mirrors don't breathe, don't have body heat, don't smell like the same cologne you put on every morning. "What's your name?" I asked, following procedure despite the absurdity of the situation. "Detective Marcus Sullivan, badge number 4427, Cedar Falls Police Department," he responded without hesitation. "That's my name and badge number." "I know," he said simply. The drive back to the station was the longest 15 minutes of my career. I sat in the passenger seat while Sarah drove, constantly glancing back at the handcuffed figure in the rear seat. Every time I looked, I half expected to see someone else, for this nightmare to resolve itself into some kind of logical explanation. It never did. The other Marcus sat quietly, not struggling against his restraints, not demanding a lawyer, not protesting his innocence. He just stared out the window with an expression I recognized as my own contemplative look. The one Sarah always said meant I was working through a difficult case in my head. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that the person in the back seat couldn't hear. "We need to figure out how we're going to handle this. What are we going to tell Chief Morrison? What are we going to put in the report?" I'd been wondering the same thing. How do you file an arrest report for yourself? What charge do you book yourself under? Attempted breaking and entering seemed inadequate for whatever the hell this was. "We follow procedure," I said, though the words felt hollow. "We book him, fingerprint him, process him like any other suspect. Then we figure out what we're dealing with." "But he's you, Marcus. Exactly you. This is impossible." "I know it's impossible," I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. Sarah was handling this as well as anyone could be expected to handle something that defied every law of physics and logic. "I'm sorry. I know how crazy this is. But we're cops, Sarah. We deal with facts, evidence, procedures, so that's what we're going to do." As we pulled into the parking lot of the Cedar Falls Police Department, I caught the other Marcus's reflection in the rearview mirror. He was smiling slightly, the same wry smile I made when I was about to solve a puzzle that had been bothering me. "Detective Sullivan," he said, speaking for the first time since we'd left the Henderson house. "Yeah? You're going to want to run those fingerprints twice." The Cedar Falls Police Department was a modest 2-story brick building that had been constructed in the 1960s and showed its age in a dozen small ways. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly. The linoleum floors were worn thin in the high-traffic areas, and the holding cells still had the original steel bars that had been painted and repainted so many times that the layers of paint were starting to chip off in places. At 12:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, the station was mostly empty except for the night desk sergeant, Tommy Kowalski, and Officer Janet Mills, who was covering dispatch. Both of them looked up as we walked in with our prisoner, and I saw the exact moment their brains tried to process what they were seeing. Tommy's jaw dropped. Janet actually stood up from her chair, her hand moving instinctively toward her service weapon. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Tommy breathed. What in the Sam Hill is going on here? Attempted breaking and entering, Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. We need to process the suspect. I guided the other Marcus toward the booking area, trying to ignore the stares of my colleagues. Word was going to spread fast, and by morning, every cop in Cedar Falls would know that Detective Marcus Sullivan had arrested someone who looked exactly like him. The booking process was methodical, routine, and completely insane all at the same time. I'd done this procedure thousands of times before, but never with someone who answered every question exactly the way I would have answered it. Full name? Marcus James Sullivan. That was my full name. My middle name wasn't on my badge or in any of the departmental paperwork that a suspect might have access to. Date of birth? March 15th, 1975. My birthday. Place of birth? St. Mary's Hospital, Cedar Falls, Iowa, where I was born. Next of kin? Jennifer Sullivan, ex-wife, currently residing in Minneapolis. David Sullivan, son, college student at Iowa State University. My ex-wife, my son. Details that weren't in any public record, details that even most of my colleagues didn't know. Sarah was taking notes, but I could see her hand shaking slightly as she wrote. Tommy and Janet had given up any pretense of working and were just staring openly. Social Security number? The other Marcus recited 9 digits that I recognized immediately as my own Social Security number. Driver's license number? Again, he provided the exact number from my Iowa driver's license. Have you ever been arrested before? No. That was correct, too. In my entire life, I'd never been arrested, never even been seriously suspected of a crime. The fingerprinting process was where things went from impossible to absolutely fucking insane. I'd been fingerprinted dozens of times over the course of my career. When I joined the force, for various security clearances, for background checks, I knew my own fingerprints the way other people know their Social Security numbers. As I rolled the other Marcus's fingers across the ink pad and then onto the fingerprint card, I could see the familiar patterns of loops and whorls that made up my unique biological signature. The scar on his left index finger from when I'd cut it on a fence as a teenager. The distinctive ridge pattern on his thumb that had always reminded me of a tiny tornado. These are my fingerprints, I told Sarah quietly. That's impossible. Look for yourself. Sarah compared the fresh fingerprint card with my personnel file. The patterns matched perfectly. Not similar, not close, but absolutely identical down to the finest detail. We need to run these through AFIS, I said, referring to the automated fingerprint identification system. See what comes back. The AFIS search took about 20 minutes. When the results came back, they showed a perfect match to Detective Marcus Sullivan, employed by the Cedar Falls Police Department with no criminal record. According to the system, the man we'd arrested was me. Run it again, I told Janet, who was operating the computer terminal. Same result. One more time. Identical match. I stared at the computer screen, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. In law enforcement, fingerprints are the gold standard of identification. They don't lie, they can't be faked convincingly, and no two people have ever been found to share the same fingerprint patterns. Until now. Chief Morrison arrived at the station around 2 a.m., summoned by a phone call from Tommy that I could only imagine was the most bizarre conversation of the man's life. Chief Morrison was a 40-year veteran of law enforcement who'd seen everything from serial killers to natural disasters. But when he walked into the booking area and saw me standing next to my identical twin, his face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. "Sullivan," he said, looking at me. Then he looked at the other Marcus, still handcuffed and sitting on the booking bench. "Sullivan." He looked back at me. "What in the blue blazes is going on here?" "I wish I knew, Chief," I said honestly. We responded to a breaking and entering call at 1247 Maple Street. When we arrived, we found this individual attempting to gain entry through a rear window. He appears to be... well, he appears to be me. Chief Morrison walked over to the other Marcus and studied his face carefully. "Stand up," he ordered. The other Marcus complied, rising to his feet with the same slight grimace I always made when standing after sitting for too long, a leftover from my old knee injury. "Turn to your left." He turned, revealing his profile. "Turn to your right." The other direction. Chief Morrison had known me for over a decade. He'd been the one who'd recruited me from the Iowa State Police, who'd promoted me to detective, who'd been my direct supervisor through dozens of cases. If anyone would be able to spot a fake or an imposter, it would be him. "Jesus Christ on a pogo stick," he muttered. "It's like looking at identical twins." "Chief," I said, "we've already run fingerprints. They match mine exactly. Every detail of his identification matches mine exactly. I'd like to request a DNA test." Morrison nodded slowly. "Do it. And I want this whole thing kept quiet until we figure out what we're dealing with. Tommy, Janet, not a word of this leaves this room. That's an order." The DNA test required a simple cheek swab. As I used the cotton swab to collect cells from inside the other Marcus's mouth, he looked directly at me and said, "You know what the results are going to show." "Do I? You're me, Marcus. You know exactly what I'm thinking right now, because you'd be thinking the same thing in this situation." He was right. If I were sitting in his position, I'd be thinking about the impossibility of what was happening, about how there had to be a logical explanation, about how this was going to turn my life upside down even if we did figure out what was going on. "How is this possible?" I asked him directly. "I don't know," he said, "but I remember everything you remember. Every case, every arrest, every day on the force. I remember graduating from the academy with you, getting married to Jennifer, the divorce, David's first day of school. I remember the night 3 years ago when we chased that meth dealer through the cornfield and we tore our ACL jumping that fence." "What are you?" "I'm Detective Marcus Sullivan," he said simply. "Same as you." The DNA test would take 48 hours for results. In the meantime, we had to figure out what to do with the other Marcus. We couldn't release him. He'd been caught in the act of attempted breaking and entering. But we couldn't exactly process him through normal channels either. Chief Morrison made the decision to hold him in protective custody, partly for his own safety, and partly because none of us had any idea what the hell we were dealing with. We moved him to the interview room rather than a cell, figuring that if this was some kind of elaborate hoax or case of mistaken identity, we didn't want to traumatize an innocent person. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a hoax. The details were too perfect, too complete. This wasn't someone who looked like me or had studied my mannerisms. This was me, in some impossible way that I couldn't begin to understand. I spent the rest of my shift writing the most surreal arrest report in the history of law enforcement. How do you describe arresting yourself? What language do you use? I found myself writing and rewriting the same paragraphs, trying to find words that could capture the impossible nature of what had happened. Suspect appeared to be identical to arresting officer in every physical respect. Subject provided identification information matching that of Detective Marcus Sullivan. Fingerprint analysis confirmed identity as Detective Marcus Sullivan, badge number 4427. It read like science fiction, but the evidence was right there in the file. Fingerprints, photographs, witness statements from Sarah, Tommy, and Janet. As dawn broke over Cedar Falls, I sat in the break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring out the window at the familiar streets of the town I'd sworn to protect and serve. Somewhere out there, Eleanor Henderson was probably telling her neighbors about the excitement at her house the night before. People would be getting ready for work, kids would be getting ready for school, life would be moving forward in all the normal, predictable ways. Except nothing was normal anymore. Over the next 2 days, while we waited for the DNA results, I threw myself into investigating the case as if it were any other crime. The difference was that this time I was investigating myself. I started with Eleanor Henderson. She was shaken by the events, but eager to help. Over a cup of tea in her kitchen, she walked me through exactly what she'd seen. "I was up late. I don't sleep as well as I used to," she explained. "I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I saw someone in my backyard. At first, I thought it might be a raccoon or a possum getting into my garbage cans. But when I looked closer, I could see it was a person." "Can you describe what you saw?" "A man, definitely. Tall, wearing dark clothes. He was very methodical about what he was doing, not rushing, not nervous. He worked on my kitchen window for several minutes before I called the police." "Did you get a look at his face?" "Not clearly. It was dark, and he had his back to me most of the time. But when Officer Chen shined her flashlight on him, I could see him clearly for just a moment." "And what did you see?" Eleanor paused, her teacup halfway to her lips. "Well, dear, I saw you. Clear as day. It was definitely you." I'd known her for years. She'd been David's third-grade teacher, and she was known for her sharp memory and attention to detail. If Eleanor Henderson said she saw me breaking into her house, then that's exactly what she saw. But I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't been anywhere near her house that night before responding to the call. The next step was to verify my own whereabouts at the time of the attempted break-in. This felt insane, investigating my own alibi as if I were a suspect in my own case, but it was necessary. I pulled the dispatch logs for that night. The call about the break-in had come in at 11:42 p.m. At that time, Sarah and I had been parked outside Mel's Diner, approximately 2.3 miles away from 1247 Maple Street. The travel time between the two locations was about 4 minutes by car. I checked Mel's security cameras. The footage clearly showed our patrol car parked in the lot from 11:15 p.m. until 11:45 p.m. when we'd responded to the call. There was no way I could have been at Eleanor Henderson's house at 11:42 p.m., but the other Marcus had been there. Eleanor had seen him. Sarah had seen him. I had seen him. So where had he come from? On Thursday morning, the DNA results came back. I sat in Chief Morrison's office with Sarah and the lab technician who'd run the test, a nervous young man named Brad Hutchins who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Well?" Chief Morrison asked. Brad consulted his paperwork, though I could tell he'd already read it multiple times. "The sample collected from the suspect shows a perfect match to Detective Sullivan's DNA profile on file with the department." "Perfect match," Morrison repeated. "Yes, sir. Identical at every marker we tested. According to our analysis, the suspect is Detective Marcus Sullivan." The room was silent for a long moment. Sarah was staring at the lab report. Morrison was rubbing his temples. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching this impossible conversation unfold. "Could there be a mistake?" Sarah asked. "Could the samples have been contaminated or switched?" "No, ma'am," Brad said. "I ran the test 3 times to be sure. The chain of custody was maintained throughout. This is accurate." "What about identical twins?" Morrison asked. "Could that explain this?" "Identical twins share the same DNA, that's true," Brad said. "But Detective Sullivan's birth records show no indication of a twin birth. And besides, we also compared the fingerprints. Identical twins don't share the same fingerprints." After the meeting, I went back to the interview room where the other Marcus was being held. He was sitting at the small table, reading a newspaper, the same way I always read the paper, folding it neatly into sections and working through it methodically. "The DNA results came back," I told him. "And?" "Perfect match. According to science, you're me." He nodded, as if this was exactly what he'd expected. "I told you that you'd want to run the fingerprints twice." "How did you know?" "Because I know how your mind works. I know how thorough you are, how you don't accept easy answers. If I were in your position, investigating someone who claimed to be me, I'd run every test twice." I sat down across from him, studying his face. It was like looking into a mirror, but a mirror that moved independently, that had its own thoughts and reactions. "What do you remember about that night?" I asked. "Which perspective do you want? Yours or mine?" "What do you mean?" "I remember being parked outside Mel's diner with Sarah, drinking coffee and talking about Mrs. Patterson's cat. I remember getting the call about the break-in. I remember driving to 1247 Maple Street and setting up a perimeter around the Henderson house." "That's my memory." "I know. But I also remember being behind Eleanor Henderson's house, working on her kitchen window with a lockpick set. I remember the frustration when the old lock mechanism was stickier than I'd expected. I remember hearing footsteps in the side yard and knowing that backup had arrived." "But why were you breaking in?" "I don't know," he said, and for the first time I heard uncertainty in his voice. "It felt necessary, like something I had to do, but I can't explain why." That night I sat in my apartment, the same apartment the other Marcus claimed to live in, trying to make sense of what was happening. I'd lived there for 3 years, since the divorce, and every detail was exactly as I'd left it. The other Marcus had given the correct address, had described the layout perfectly, had even known about the loose floorboard in the bedroom that squeaked when you stepped on it. I called Jennifer, my ex-wife, though I wasn't sure what I was going to tell her. "Marcus?" she answered, sounding surprised. "It's late. Is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something strange," I said. "Have I been acting differently lately? Saying anything unusual? Going anywhere I don't normally go?" "No more than usual," she said, though there was concern in her voice. "You called last week to check on David, but that's normal. Marcus, what's going on? You sound worried." "When did I call?" "Tuesday night, around 11. You sounded tired, said you were working late shift. Why?" Tuesday night at 11 was approximately the same time I'd been arresting myself behind Eleanor Henderson's house. "Jennifer, I need you to think carefully. When I called, did I say anything about where I was or what I was doing?" "You said you were at the station, catching up on paperwork." "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's happened?" "I was at the station Tuesday night, but not until after midnight and not until after I'd made the arrest. So who had called Jennifer?" "Nothing's happened," I lied. "I'm just working on a case and trying to verify some timelines. I'll talk to you later." After I hung up, I checked my phone records online. According to Verizon, my phone had made a call to Jennifer's number at 11:03 p.m. on Tuesday night. The call had lasted 6 minutes. But at 11:03 p.m. on Tuesday night, I'd been sitting in the patrol car with Sarah, and my phone had been in my pocket the entire time. Over the next week, I started documenting everything. Every memory I had, every activity, every routine. I compared my memories to physical evidence, credit card records, security camera footage, witness statements. What I found was that there were gaps, small ones but consistent. Times when I remembered being in one place but evidence suggested I'd been somewhere else. Phone calls I'd apparently made but didn't remember making. Purchases that appeared on my credit card statement for items I'd never bought. The pattern went back months, maybe longer. I'd been too busy, too focused on routine to notice the discrepancies before. But now, looking carefully, I could see that my life had been doubled in small, subtle ways. Someone who looked exactly like me, who had my fingerprints and DNA, who knew all my personal information, had been living parts of my life. 8 days after the arrest, it happened again. I was at home off duty when I got a call from Sarah. "Marcus, we've got another situation. Same type of call. Attempted break-in. But this time the suspect took off when the homeowner spotted him." "I'll be right there." "Marcus?" Sarah's voice was tight with something I couldn't identify. "The homeowner gave a description of the suspect." I already knew what she was going to say. "He described you again." This time, the location was 892 Pine Street, about 2 miles from the Henderson house. The homeowner, a man named Robert Kim, had been watching TV when he'd heard someone trying to force open his back door. When he'd gone to investigate, he'd seen a man matching my description working on the lock. "I yelled at him to get away from my house," Kim told me as I took his statement. "He looked right at me, and I swear to God, officer, it was like looking at you. Same face, same build, everything." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. I've lived in this town for 12 years. I know all the local cops by sight. It was definitely you." But I'd been at home at the time of this incident, and I had a receipt from the pizza place to prove it. I'd ordered dinner at 8:30 p.m., the delivery driver had arrived at 9:15 p.m., and the attempted break-in had occurred around 9:30 p.m. The other Marcus, because that's how I'd started thinking of him, was still in custody at the station. So who had Robert Kim seen? Chief Morrison called in help from the Iowa State Police. Detective Linda Hayes arrived from Des Moines, a specialist in unusual cases and unexplained phenomena. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built a reputation for solving cases that other investigators had given up on. "I've read your reports," she told me during our first meeting. "This is either the most elaborate hoax I've ever encountered, or we're dealing with something that doesn't fit any normal category. What's your professional opinion?" "Hoaxes require motivation. What would be the point of someone going to these lengths to impersonate a small-town detective? You're not wealthy, you're not famous, you don't have access to state secrets. The cost and effort required to duplicate your fingerprints and DNA would be enormous, and for what gain? So, you think it's real?" "I think we need to consider all possibilities no matter how unlikely they seem." Detective Hayes interviewed the other Marcus extensively. She brought in specialists, psychologists, forensic experts, even a physicist from the University of Iowa who specialized in quantum mechanics and parallel universe theory. The psychologist found no evidence of mental illness or delusional thinking. The other Marcus answered questions consistently, demonstrated normal cognitive function, and showed no signs of manipulation or deception. The forensic expert confirmed that the fingerprints and DNA were genuine, not artificially created or surgically altered. The physicist listened to our story and proposed a theory that sounded like something out of a science fiction movie. Dr. Elizabeth Warren from the University of Iowa's physics department sat in Chief Morrison's office, surrounded by case files and evidence bags, and explained a concept that hurt my brain to think about. "In quantum mechanics," she said, "there's a principle called the many worlds interpretation. It suggests that every quantum measurement causes the universe to split into multiple parallel realities, each representing a different possible outcome." "English, please," Morrison said. "Think of it like this. Every time you make a decision, turn left or turn right, take a job or don't take a job, arrest a suspect or let them go, the universe splits. In one reality, you make one choice. In another reality, you make a different choice. Both realities exist simultaneously." "And you think that's what's happening here?" I asked. "It's a possibility. Perhaps somehow your parallel selves from other realities are bleeding through into this one. The other Marcus isn't an imposter or clone. He's you, from a reality where he made different choices." "That's insane," Sarah said. "So is arresting your identical twin who shares your DNA and fingerprints," Dr. Warren replied. "Sometimes insane is all we have left." Dr. Warren's theory was still rattling around in my head when the third incident occurred. This time, I was working the night shift again, partnered with Officer Mike Rodriguez, since Sarah had requested a few days off to process everything that had happened. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. Another attempted break-in, this time at 445 Oak Street. But when Mike and I arrived at the scene, we found something different. The homeowner, Mrs. Grace Patterson, the same Mrs. Patterson whose cat had caused such a commotion the week before, met us at her front door in her bathrobe, clearly shaken. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she said, clutching her robe tighter. "There's someone in my backyard." I heard them moving around back there about 20 minutes ago. Are they still there? Mike asked. I think so. I've been too scared to look. We approached the backyard cautiously, flashlights drawn. The night was overcast, with thick clouds blocking out most of the moonlight. Mike took the left side of the yard while I approached from the right. That's when I saw him. Not the other Marcus this time, but me. The real me. Or another real me. He was crouched behind Mrs. Patterson's garden shed, and when my flashlight beam found him, he looked up with an expression of complete shock. What the hell? He whispered, staring at me. My thoughts exactly, I replied. This version of me was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a dark jacket, instead of my police uniform. He looked exactly like me, but tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a several-day growth of beard. Mike, I called out, keeping my flashlight trained on the figure. I need you over here. Mike came running, his own flashlight bobbing as he moved. When he saw what I was illuminating, he stopped dead in his tracks. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, he breathed, echoing Tommy's reaction from the week before. There's two of you. The civilian Marcus raised his hand slowly. Don't shoot, he said. I can explain. I'm listening, I said, though I kept my weapon ready. My name is Marcus Sullivan. I'm a private investigator from Cedar Falls. I've been tracking a series of break-ins in this neighborhood, and I followed the suspect here tonight. Private investigator? Mike asked. Marcus, you're a police detective. Not in his reality, the civilian Marcus said, looking directly at me. In my reality, I left the force 5 years ago after the divorce, started my own investigation business. But I've been getting these flashes, memories that aren't mine, dreams about being a cop again. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night air. What kind of memories? Working with a partner named Sarah Chen, arresting someone who looked exactly like me, sitting in interview rooms trying to figure out how fingerprints could match when the person was clearly someone else. Those were my memories, my experiences from the past week. Dr. Warren was right, I said, more to myself than to anyone else. Who's Dr. Warren? The civilian Marcus asked. A physicist. She thinks we're parallel versions of each other, bleeding through from different realities. The civilian Marcus nodded slowly. That would explain a lot. In my reality, I never arrested the other me. I've been chasing him for weeks, trying to figure out who he is and why he's been committing these break-ins. So there are at least 3 of us, Mike said, his voice strained. The cop Marcus, the prisoner Marcus, and the private investigator Marcus. At least 3, the civilian Marcus confirmed. But I think there might be more. We brought the civilian Marcus, I started thinking of him as P.I. Marcus, back to the station. Chief Morrison took one look at him and reached for his bottle of antacids. How many of you are there? He asked wearily. We don't know, I admitted, but we need to figure this out before it gets worse. Dr. Warren returned the next morning, accompanied by a colleague from the university's psychology department. They interviewed all 3 versions of Marcus, me, the original prisoner, who we'd started calling Burglar Marcus, and P.I. Marcus. This is unprecedented, Dr. Warren said after the interviews. 3 distinct individuals with identical physical characteristics but different life experiences and memories. It's as if we're seeing a cross-section of parallel realities. The question is why, said Dr. Patricia Reeves, the psychologist. Why is this happening now? What triggered the convergence? In quantum mechanics, Dr. Warren explained, parallel realities can sometimes intersect at moments of high emotional or psychological stress. Major life changes, traumatic events, significant decisions. I thought about what had been happening in my life recently, the approach of retirement, the loneliness of the divorce, the routine of small-town police work that had started to feel more like a trap than a calling. "I've been questioning everything lately," I admitted. "Whether I made the right choices, whether I should have stayed married, whether I should have taken that job offer in Des Moines 5 years ago." "In my reality, I did take that job offer," P.I. Marcus said. "Worked as a detective in Des Moines for 2 years before going private." "And in my reality," Burglar Marcus said quietly, "I never became a cop at all. I've been drifting for years, taking odd jobs, getting into trouble. The break-ins. I don't know why I'm doing them. It's like I'm compelled to." Dr. Reeves leaned forward. "What if each of you represents a different path that Marcus Sullivan could have taken? The dedicated cop, the independent investigator, the troubled drifter. Different choices, different outcomes, but all stemming from the same core person." "But why are we ending up in the same reality?" I asked. "Maybe," Dr. Warren said slowly, "this reality is the focal point, the place where all the parallel possibilities are converging. Perhaps this version of Cedar Falls is where the quantum barriers are thinnest." As if to prove Dr. Warren's theory, the fourth Marcus appeared 2 days later. This time, he walked into the police station voluntarily. He was wearing a federal agent's suit and flashing an FBI badge that looked authentic down to the serial numbers. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Sullivan," he announced to Tommy at the front desk. "I'm here to investigate reports of unusual activity in this jurisdiction." Tommy, who was getting used to impossible situations, just sighed and called Chief Morrison. "Chief, there's another one." FBI Marcus was different from the other versions. He carried himself with federal authority, spoke in the clipped professional tones of someone used to being obeyed without question. When he was brought to the interview room where the rest of us were gathered, he assessed the situation with the cold efficiency of a trained investigator. "Parallel universe convergence," he said, after we explained what had been happening. "We've been tracking similar phenomena across the Midwest. This appears to be a localized reality breach." "We?" I asked. "There's a federal task force that investigates unexplained phenomena. We call them X-Files cases, though that's not the official designation. Your situation here in Cedar Falls is part of a larger pattern." "What kind of pattern?" Dr. Warren asked. "Reality distortions. People encountering alternate versions of themselves, locations that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, temporal anomalies. It's been increasing in frequency over the past 6 months." FBI Marcus opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick file. "We have documented cases in Missouri, Illinois, Nebraska, and now Iowa, all in small Midwestern towns, all involving ordinary people who suddenly find themselves confronting impossible situations." He spread photographs across the table. They showed other people in other towns, all standing next to identical versions of themselves. Some of the photos were surveillance footage. Others were crime scene photos. A few appeared to be family pictures where the same person appeared twice in the same frame. "This is happening to other people?" P.I. Marcus asked. "Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. We think it started with something called the Henderson event." "Henderson?" I said. "Like Eleanor Henderson?" "No relation. Dr. William Henderson was a physicist at Fermilab in Illinois. 6 months ago, he was conducting experiments with quantum field manipulation when something went wrong. There was an explosion, Dr. Henderson disappeared, and since then, we've been seeing reality distortions in an expanding radius from the lab." Dr. Warren studied the photographs with growing excitement. A quantum field explosion could theoretically weaken the barriers between parallel realities, if the effect is spreading outward from the source. "Then Cedar Falls is just the latest location to be affected," FBI Marcus finished, "and it's going to get worse before it gets better." Chief Morrison, faced with a situation that was clearly beyond the scope of small-town law enforcement, officially requested federal assistance. FBI Marcus took over the investigation, but kept all of us involved as consultants and witnesses. The first step, he said, is to determine if there are more versions of Marcus Sullivan in this reality. Based on our experience with other cases, convergence events usually involve between 4 and 12 parallel selves. We organized search teams to canvass the town, looking for any reports of someone matching my description in places where I shouldn't have been. We checked security cameras, interviewed witnesses, and followed up on every lead. What we found was disturbing. Over the past 3 months, various versions of Marcus Sullivan had been spotted all over Cedar Falls. Security footage from the bank showed me making a deposit at a time when I'd been on duty across town. The grocery store had surveillance video of me buying items I'd never purchased. The gas station on Route 9 had footage of me filling up a car I didn't own. There are at least 6 of us, FBI Marcus concluded after reviewing all the evidence. Possibly more. Where are the others? I asked. That's what we need to find out, and we need to find them fast. Why? What's the hurry? FBI Marcus looked grim. Because in other locations where we've seen this phenomenon, the convergence eventually becomes unstable. The parallel selves start to merge. What do you mean, merge? Think of it like 2 streams flowing together. At first, they maintain their separate identities, but eventually they become one stream, one consciousness, one person. Which one survives? P.I. Marcus asked. That's the problem, FBI Marcus said. Sometimes none of them do. We spent the next week systematically searching Cedar Falls for the missing versions of Marcus Sullivan. It was surreal, hunting for myself in my own hometown, knowing that each version we found might have completely different memories and experiences. We found Marcus 5 living in a homeless shelter on the outskirts of town. This version was clearly struggling. Thin, unkempt, with the hollow eyes of someone who'd given up on life. He told us he'd been drifting since leaving the army, unable to hold down a job or maintain relationships. I keep having dreams, he said during his interview. Dreams about being a cop, about having a family, about living in a house instead of shelters and cheap motels. But when I wake up, this is my reality. Marcus 6 was discovered working at a construction site under an assumed name. He was built like a linebacker, muscles developed from years of physical labor, but when we approached him, he broke down crying. I've been seeing things, he said, memories that aren't mine. I remember arresting people, but I've never been a cop. I remember being married, but I've never had a serious relationship. I thought I was going crazy. Each version of Marcus had a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of a life that could have been. The cop, the private investigator, the burglar, the FBI agent, the drifter, the construction worker. All the paths that Marcus Sullivan might have taken, all converging in this one small town. But FBI Marcus was right. The convergence was becoming unstable. It started with memory bleeds. I would be sitting at my desk writing a report when suddenly I'd remember working a case as a private investigator. Or I'd be driving patrol and suddenly recall investigating a federal crime that I'd never actually worked. The other versions were experiencing the same thing. P.I. Marcus remembered arresting Burglar Marcus, even though that had been my experience. Burglar Marcus recalled conversations with FBI Marcus that had never happened. Construction worker Marcus started having detailed knowledge of police procedures he'd never learned. The barriers between your individual consciousnesses are breaking down, Dr. Warren explained. You're beginning to share memories, experiences, even personality traits. How long do we have? I asked. Based on other cases, maybe a week. After that, the convergence will become irreversible. And then what happens? One of 3 outcomes, FBI Marcus said. Either one consciousness becomes dominant and absorbs the others, or they merge into a hybrid personality that's none of the originals, or the paradox becomes too great for reality to sustain, and all versions are erased. The thought of simply ceasing to exist was terrifying, but the thought of losing my individual identity, of becoming some kind of composite person made up of all the different paths my life might have taken, was somehow worse. "There has to be a way to reverse this," I said. "There might be," FBI Marcus replied, "but it would require returning to the source of the disturbance." "The Henderson event?" "Fermilab. If we can find Dr. Henderson, or at least understand what he was working on when the explosion occurred, we might be able to stabilize the quantum field and separate the parallel realities." "That's a big if." "It's the only chance we have." Chief Morrison granted me emergency leave, and FBI Marcus arranged for federal transport to Fermilab in Illinois. The other versions of Marcus came with us. We discovered that being separated by more than a few miles caused severe disorientation and memory loss, as if our quantum entanglement was weakening the farther apart we were. The trip to Fermilab was surreal. 6 identical men sitting in a federal transport van, each one a different version of the same person. We tried to avoid talking to each other too much. Dr. Warren had warned that excessive interaction might accelerate the convergence process. Fermilab was a sprawling complex of buildings and particle accelerators outside Chicago. FBI Marcus had arranged for us to meet with Dr. Sarah Kim, Dr. Henderson's former research partner, and the only person who fully understood what he'd been working on when the accident occurred. Dr. Kim was a small, intense woman with prematurely gray hair and the focused demeanor of someone who'd been working 18-hour days for months. She led us to a secure conference room and spread out technical diagrams that looked like blueprints for science fiction machinery. William was obsessed with the idea of quantum consciousness, she explained. He believed that human consciousness wasn't limited to a single reality, that our awareness somehow extended across all possible versions of ourselves in parallel universes. "And he was trying to prove this?" Dr. Warren asked. "More than prove it. He wanted to access it, to consciously connect with alternate versions of himself, to gain knowledge and experiences from his parallel selves." "That's impossible," Dr. Warren said. William didn't think so. He'd been working on a quantum field generator that could theoretically thin the barriers between realities, allowing consciousness to flow between parallel selves. And that's what exploded? "The explosion was just the beginning," Dr. Kim said grimly. "The real problem is that the quantum field is still active. It's been expanding outward from the lab for 6 months, creating reality distortions wherever it encounters people who are psychologically ready for the experience." "What do you mean, psychologically ready?" I asked. "People who are questioning their life choices, who are wondering, what if? Who are at crossroads in their lives. The field seems to target individuals who are already mentally exploring alternate possibilities for themselves." That described my state of mind perfectly. The approaching retirement, the regrets about my divorce, the questions about whether I'd made the right choices, I'd been the perfect target for this quantum phenomenon. "Where's Dr. Henderson now?" FBI Marcus asked. "That's the problem," Dr. Kim said. "We don't know. When the explosion occurred, William was caught in the direct path of the quantum field. He disappeared completely. But we've been detecting energy signatures that suggest he might still be connected to the field somehow." "Connected how?" "His consciousness might be spread across multiple realities simultaneously. If that's the case, he could be experiencing life as dozens or hundreds of different versions of himself, all at the same time." The thought was horrifying. Imagine trying to maintain your sanity while experiencing the memories and experiences of countless alternate versions of yourself, all overlapping and bleeding together in an endless stream of contradictory information. "Can the field be shut down?" Dr. Warren asked. "Theoretically, yes, but it would require someone to enter the affected area and manually shut down the quantum generators. The problem is that anyone who enters the field becomes subject to the convergence effect. So whoever goes in to shut it down might not come back out as the same person." "Exactly. We spent that night in a motel near Fermilab. 6 versions of Marcus Sullivan trying to figure out how to save not just ourselves, but potentially hundreds of other people who were experiencing reality distortions across the Midwest. "I'll do it," burglar Marcus said quietly. "I'll go into the field and shut down the generators." "Why you?" I asked. "Because I've got the least to lose. My life has been a disaster from the start. If something goes wrong, if I don't come back, at least the rest of you can continue with your lives." "That's not how this works," P.I. Marcus said. "We're all connected now. If one of us is erased, it affects all of us." "Then we all go," FBI Marcus said. "Together." "That's suicide," construction worker Marcus protested. 6 people entering an unstable quantum field at the same time? The convergence would be instantaneous. "Maybe that's what we need," Drifter Marcus said. He'd been quiet for most of the trip, but now he looked up with something approaching hope in his eyes. "Maybe instead of fighting the convergence, we embrace it. Become one person, but consciously, deliberately. Pool all our experiences and knowledge to create someone strong enough to survive the field and shut down the generators." Dr. Warren, who'd been silent during this exchange, looked up from her calculations. "It's theoretically possible," she said slowly. "A voluntary convergence might be more stable than a random one, but there's no guarantee what kind of person would emerge from the process. There's no guarantee any of us survive if we don't try," I said. We voted. 6 versions of the same person, democratically deciding the fate of their collective existence. The decision was unanimous. We would converge voluntarily, creating a composite Marcus Sullivan who could enter the quantum field and shut down the generators that were causing reality distortions across the Midwest. Dr. Kim led us to a special chamber at Fermilab that had been designed for quantum consciousness experiments. It was a sterile white room with 6 chairs arranged in a circle around a central control console. "The process should take about an hour," Dr. Kim explained. "The quantum field generators will gradually synchronize your brain waves and neural patterns. As the convergence proceeds, you'll begin to share memories, experiences, and eventually consciousness." "What will it feel like?" Drifter Marcus asked. "Based on Dr. Henderson's notes, it should be like gradually remembering a dream. At first, you'll have access to each other's memories, as if they were your own recollections. Then the boundaries between your individual identities will start to blur. Finally, you'll become a single consciousness with the combined experiences of all 6 versions." "And afterwards?" I asked. "You'll be Marcus Sullivan, but not any specific version of Marcus Sullivan. You'll remember being a cop, a private investigator, a construction worker, an FBI agent, a drifter, and a burglar. All of those experiences will be equally real to you." It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The thought of losing my individual identity was frightening, but the possibility of gaining 5 lifetimes' worth of additional experiences and knowledge was intriguing. "Are we ready?" FBI Marcus asked. We took our seats in the convergence chamber. Dr. Kim initiated the quantum field sequence, and the room filled with a low humming sound that seemed to resonate in my bones. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, I began to remember things that hadn't happened to me. I remembered the day I left the police force to become a private investigator. The frustration with departmental politics, the desire for independence, the excitement of starting my own business. But I also remembered staying on the force, being promoted to detective, working cases with Sarah Chen. I remembered the construction site where I'd worked for 3 years, the satisfaction of building something with my hands, the camaraderie of the crew. But I also remembered the FBI Academy, the pride of wearing a federal badge, the authority that came with representing the United States government. I remembered the homeless shelter, the despair of having nowhere to go, the daily struggle just to survive. But I also remembered the comfortable apartment I'd lived in since my divorce, the stability of steady employment, the respect of my colleagues. I remembered breaking into houses in the middle of the night, driven by a compulsion I couldn't understand or control. But I also remembered arresting criminals, protecting the innocent, upholding the law. All of these memories felt equally real, equally mine. They were different paths the same person had taken, different choices that had led to different outcomes. But they were all Marcus Sullivan. As the convergence continued, the boundaries between the different versions began to blur. I could feel the presence of the others in my mind, their thoughts and emotions mixing with my own. We were becoming something new, something that had never existed before. When the process was complete, I opened my eyes and looked around the convergence chamber. 5 empty chairs surrounded me. I was alone, but I wasn't alone. I was all of them, and they were all me. Standing up felt different. I had muscle memory from years of construction work, tactical training from the FBI Academy, investigative instincts from my time as a private detective, street survival skills from my period as a drifter, law enforcement experience from my police career, and even the stealth and breaking and entering skills from my criminal period. I was Marcus Sullivan, but I was more than any single version of Marcus Sullivan had ever been. "How do you feel?" Dr. Kim asked. "Complete," I said, and realized it was true. All my life I'd felt like something was missing, like I was only experiencing a fraction of my potential. Now, for the first time, I felt whole. "Are you ready to enter the quantum field?" I nodded. I had the federal training to understand the technical aspects of what I needed to do, the construction experience to handle the physical demands, the police training to stay calm under pressure, the private investigator's problem-solving skills, the drifter's ability to adapt to any situation, and even the burglar's talent for getting into places I wasn't supposed to be. I was ready. The quantum field at the center of Fermilab was visible as a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. As I approached it, I could feel reality becoming unstable around me. The walls of the laboratory seemed to flicker, showing glimpses of other versions of the same room, other possibilities for how this moment might unfold. I stepped into the field. Immediately, I was surrounded by chaos. I could see dozens of versions of the laboratory simultaneously, each one slightly different. In some versions, Dr. Henderson was still working at his console. In others, the explosion had never happened. In still others, the entire building was completely different. But I remained stable. The convergence had made me resistant to the reality distortions. I could see all the possibilities, but I remained anchored to my own identity. I moved toward the center of the field, where the quantum generators were located. As I walked, I passed through pockets of extreme distortion where I could see other people who'd been caught in the field. Men and women experiencing their own convergence events, some fighting against the merging process, others already lost in the chaos of multiple realities. At the center of the field, I found Dr. Henderson, or what was left of him. He was standing at the control console, but he was flickering between dozens of different versions of himself. Young Henderson, old Henderson, Henderson as a janitor, Henderson as a professor, Henderson as a student, Henderson as someone who'd never been born. All the possibilities of his existence playing out simultaneously. "You have to stop this," he said, his voice coming from multiple versions at once. I can't hold it together anymore. The convergence, it's spreading. How do I shut it down? The master control, console. But you have to stabilize the field first, or the shutdown will cause a cascade. Henderson's multiple selves were speaking at different times, creating a confusing overlap of instructions. But I understood. I had to stabilize the quantum field before I could safely shut down the generators, or the sudden collapse would cause an explosion that would spread the distortion effect even further. Using my combined knowledge, I approached the control console. My FBI training helped me understand the federal technology that had been integrated into Henderson's original design. My construction experience helped me recognize which systems were load-bearing and which could be safely modified. My police training kept me calm under pressure. My private investigator skills helped me piece together the incomplete information. My time as a drifter had taught me to improvise with limited resources. Even my criminal experience proved useful. I had to essentially break into the quantum field's security systems to gain control. Working quickly, I began the stabilization sequence. The field around me started to solidify, the multiple realities beginning to separate and stabilize. Henderson's various selves stopped flickering and merged into a single, coherent person. "Thank you," he said, collapsing into a chair. "I've been trapped in that convergence for months, living every possible version of my life simultaneously. It was hell. Can you help me shut this down safely?" "Yes. But you need to know. When we shut down the generators, everyone who's been affected by the field will snap back to their original reality. The other versions of yourself, the people in other towns who've been experiencing convergences, they'll all return to their separate existences. And me? You're a special case. You converged voluntarily, outside the field. I think you'll remain as you are. A composite consciousness with the memories and experiences of all your parallel selves." It was what I'd hoped to hear. I didn't want to lose the completeness I'd gained, the sense of being the fullest possible version of myself. Together, Henderson and I initiated the shutdown sequence. The quantum generators began powering down, and I could feel the field around us contracting, pulling back toward its source. The reality distortions became less severe, the multiple possibilities collapsing back into single, stable outcomes. When we emerged from the quantum field, Dr. Kim and Dr. Warren were waiting with expressions of amazement and relief. "It worked," Dr. Kim said. "The field is contracting rapidly. Our sensors show the distortions are disappearing across the entire affected area." "What about the other people who were experiencing convergences?" I asked. "They're returning to their original realities," Dr. Warren said, consulting her instruments. "The parallel selves are separating and returning to their own dimensions. It's as if the past 6 months never happened. But for me, they had happened." I retained all the memories of all 6 versions of Marcus Sullivan. I remembered being a cop in Cedar Falls, but I also remembered all the other paths my life could have taken. I was the detective who'd arrested his own ghost, but I was also the ghost who'd been arrested, and the federal agent who'd investigated the case, and the private investigator who'd been tracking the mystery, and the construction worker who'd been having impossible dreams, and the drifter who'd been committing crimes he couldn't understand. I was all of them, and somehow that made me more myself than I'd ever been before. I returned to Cedar Falls 3 days later. Chief Morrison was surprised to see me. According to his records, I'd called in 6 months ago to report that I was taking early retirement and moving to Minnesota. There was no record of any arrest involving someone who looked like me, no evidence of the convergence event that had changed my life. But I remembered it all. Sarah Chen didn't recognize me at first. In this reality, she'd never been my partner. She'd transferred to the Des Moines Police Department when she'd first moved to Iowa. But when I introduced myself and mentioned some of the cases we'd worked together in my original reality, something flickered in her eyes. "I keep having these dreams," she said. "Dreams about working with a partner named Marcus Sullivan in a small town. But that's never happened. I've never worked anywhere but Des Moines." "Dreams can be memory echoes," I told her. "Sometimes when realities converge and then separate, fragments get left behind. She looked at me strangely, but nodded. That's an interesting theory. Eleanor Henderson was fine. Her house had never been broken into. But when I met her on the street one day, she studied my face carefully. You look familiar, dear, she said. Have we met before? I don't think so, ma'am, but maybe in another life. She smiled. I've always believed in other lives. The idea that we live many different versions of ourselves, making different choices, experiencing different outcomes. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could somehow remember all of them? It would, I agreed. I used my federal connections to establish a new identity and open a private investigation business in Cedar Falls. My FBI experience had given me contacts and credibility. My police background provided investigative skills. My construction work had taught me patience and attention to detail. My time as a drifter had shown me how to read people and situations, and even my criminal period had given me insights into how lawbreakers think and operate. I was uniquely qualified to handle cases that other investigators couldn't solve. Missing persons, unexplained phenomena, cases that fell between the cracks of normal law enforcement. I specialized in the impossible, the inexplicable, the cases that made other people scratch their heads and give up, because I knew from personal experience that impossible things happen every day. That reality is more flexible than most people realize, that sometimes the most unbelievable explanation is the only one that fits the facts. The case that haunts me isn't the one I solved. It's the knowledge that somewhere out there, in parallel realities that exist alongside our own, other versions of myself are living different lives, making different choices, experiencing different outcomes. The detective who arrested his own ghost taught me that we're all more than we appear to be. We're the sum of every choice we've ever made, but we're also the sum of every choice we didn't make, every path we didn't take, every possibility we didn't explore. I am Marcus Sullivan. I'm a police detective and a private investigator and an FBI agent and a construction worker and a drifter and a criminal. I'm all the people I could have been, and somehow that makes me exactly who I was always meant to be. And sometimes, late at night, when the boundaries between realities are thinnest, I can still feel the presence of my other selves. They're out there, living their own lives, solving their own cases, making their own choices. But we're all connected. We're all the same person, just wearing different faces, walking different paths, writing different stories. The fingerprints matched. The DNA matched. The question was never which one of us was real.